welcome back to another episode of South Baltimore Now, the podcast where we dig into the stories and the people and the decisions shaping life here in South Baltimore. I'm Nate Carper, and today we're excited to welcome back someone who's been a bit of a regular around here. We're talking with Councilman Zac Blanchard, who's making his third appearance on the show. First, when he was running for city council, then right after taking office last December, and now he's back again. So Zac, at this point, I think maybe we owe you a punch card or something. If you join us 2 more times, you get a free lunch at Cross Street Market or something.
Or at least a bumper sticker. That'd be cool.
But yeah, we could do that. We can get you a bumper sticker.
Yeah, or a t-shirt, one or the other.
We really appreciate you making the time out of your busy schedule to join us here on the podcast and share updates with the community. I just want to let you know that anytime you want to jump back on and share updates with the community, we're glad to have you. So Kev, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. The holidays are always crazy and relaxing all at the same time, but it's nice to get the kids back out of the house.
Yeah, unfortunately, we all, not to start off things on a negative note, but we had to end the holiday season with that Ravens game, which...
Yeah.
On the bright side, we don't have to spend all this week worrying about how bad the Ravens would lose to Houston. So
that's true.
Yeah, it's always fun to keep the party going one more week, but I don't think anybody saw this Ravens team as the Super Bowl
this
contender.
season was tough, man.
Yeah, Zac, we appreciate you coming on, keeping us updated on the government things going on in the area and everything else going on in the community. So I know this past year has been a big change for you professionally and at a personal level. Now you're a member of the Baltimore City Council. So how was that transition? How did the first year go?
Yeah, it was a double transition because inauguration was on December 5th of 2024, and my wife went into labor that evening. She actually went into labor during the ceremonial hearing, right? So well, I become a council person, second child is born back to back. So December of 2024 was a crazy month. On top of that, I'm coming in as a new council member. I have a new staff that's coming in as well. So both the learning process, the figuring out where to go to get things resolved, and all those figuring out how to prioritize everything that's going on and just what to expect from the job. It's a very busy job and I do it full time. It's technically a part-time job. I don't have another job, so I'm just a full-time council member. But man, the first 7 or 8 months in office, I was getting up at 4 or 5 in the morning, working doing emails until the babies woke up, bring the babies to daycare, go to work. And it was really a grind. And I'll say the last 2 or 3 months, definitely still busy, but I feel like partially figuring out how to prioritize things and just like me learning the job, becoming a little more efficient. All my staff haven't been here for a while. The last couple months have been a lot more sane. So that's been a good for me, probably good for the district too. So that's how I would describe the last 13 months in office.
Gotcha. I think once people start having kids and have a professional life, any ways to find more sanity is always a good thing. I think we all find ourselves in too deep a lot of times. So good to hear that the last few months are in a better routine.
Yeah.
You ran for office and you're in office. Is there anything that really surprised you about the way government works getting into the job?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's a question I've gotten a couple times. It's a good one. I actually think that for the most part, my job is pretty similar to what I thought my job would be. I taught American government at the Naval Academy for a couple of years. I also was tangentially involved in city stuff by being a neighborhood association president and things like that. There wasn't too much that surprised me. I knew it was going to be really busy. I knew that there are, in some ways, people can act differently because you're in office, and the politics of getting stuff done can be a little, especially coming from like the Marine Corps, where it's a very different way of communicating and resolving conflict and whatnot. So there's definitely some of that to learn. I knew there'd also be really big on building coalitions, and if you want to get meaningful stuff done, you need a lot of people moving in the same direction on it. And so I think for the most part that the one thing, committees are where the bills. So a committee who specializes in, say, land use and transportation or public safety or whatever. And so they do the hearing over the bill before they move it forward to the full council for a vote, if it makes it through the committee. And so it's a really important part. State level, Congress, every legislature has a committee structure. But because there's only 15 members of the council, the committee structure, and we're all in like 4 committees, right? So you really dive into specific stuff way less than I think my counterparts in the General Assembly. So for South Baltimore, the 46th district, I think they really have an opportunity to specialize in specific policy areas through the committees that are not nearly as strong. It's a much more jack of all trades, master of none type of situation on the council level in a way that I didn't expect. The other thing that I think probably surprised me a lot is just the sheer level of how hard it is to actually put a bill together to become a law. Like identifying something that needs to change is one thing, but then drafting it into a bill that hits all the things you want to hit and doesn't hit the things that you don't want to hit and can get the votes and doesn't trip some crazy legal precedent from some like 1990 state Supreme Court case involving Carroll County that somehow might apply to this, right? Like it's actually really hard. And there's a lot of work that goes into legislating. And you can take like one bill that I introduced at the end of October that I'm really excited about, the smoke shops zoning bill that will put some real guardrails on the rapid proliferation of smoke shops and vape shops that we've seen in the city over the last several years. Even something that sounds more straightforward like that and is really broadly popular, everyone's like, that's a great idea. Thanks for doing that. It was a good amount of work to figure it out.
Thanks for that perspective. Interesting you brought up the smoke shops. That's something I've been digging into a lot just in conversations around the neighborhood and trying to understand it more myself. What is it that's driving so many of these smoke shops? Do you know? Because cannabis is legal. You can find cigarettes and vapes and cigars at any convenience store. What is it that's driving the popularity of these smoke shops? Because there must be 10 of them in the Federal Hill Business District at this point.
I think it's 9 within 2 blocks of Cross Street Market. It's kind of wild. One of them is closed. But yeah, so that's something that we're really interested in, Kevin. The biggest thing, without trying to dive too much into the details of it, there was some legal ambiguity that allowed smoke shops to sell basically knockoff marijuana for years. And so they were selling like synthetic weed from California that didn't have the taxes and didn't have the restrictions that the legal Maryland marijuana dispensaries had. So I think a lot of them were making a lot of money off of that. On top of that, we have seen an explosion in vaping, particularly amongst our young people. It's like by the time we got to my generation, we'd really defeated cigarettes and like that as a broad like public health challenge. And then boom, vaping with today's teenagers. And so that's certainly part of it too. I think the biggest thing is that weird legal area with the marijuana. Fortunately, the state courts just determined that those synthetic weed Delta 8, I think, does fall under the restrictions. And so that's being able to be resolved. And we've already seen a couple of smoke shops across the district close because of that. And that's probably the single biggest driver, but there's several. And there's other things too. Like I've had multiple like of the property owners in the area say, hey, these guys are trying to come in, but like they can't pay what like this smoke shop's offering, right? And so like they were actually crowding out the types of businesses that we want in our Main Street footprint amongst the public health issue, amongst the health of our teenagers issues. And just real briefly, folks at home, if they're not familiar with it. So my bill, which is one of 3, we had a package of bills around smoke shops, basically says you can't have, it defines what a smoke shop is in the zoning code. And it says you can't have a smoke shop within X number of feet from a school or a park or other places that our young people are. And then also to prevent overconcentration, they can't be within, I think, 750 feet of another smoke shop. So smoke shops that are currently within the distances, the way this always works in the zoning code, they will be grandfathered in. But if, say, that one closes after 12 months or whatever, you can't then bring another one in. So we'll see a decrease gradually, but the growth will stop immediately once it passes, which hopefully will be, God willing, in March.
Interesting. Thanks for that. In the past, I guess it's 13 months now, what are some issues that you worked on that you were really passionate about? And I guess what are the day-to-day things that have excited you the most about this job?
Yeah. So the biggest legislative thing that we did last year and that the city council has done for, 10 years or so is the housing package. The Housing Options Opportunities Package. I was a co-sponsor of all those bills. The whole idea is it's too expensive. It's too hard and too expensive to own a home in the city. Rent is getting too expensive. There's all sorts of bad outcomes that are coming out of those two facts. And somehow we also have this vacant housing crisis and all these other things. And so the goal is we want people to be able to get the type of house they need in the neighborhood they want to be in at a price they can afford. And so it was a set of bills to change the zoning code and the building code to address that. So 4 of those 5 bills have passed. The 5th bill is going through some negotiations based off of a lot of community feedback, as well as some talking between council members. So it's going to have some amendments. We think it'll be able to pass, but it's based off all the feedback in a change form from what it was introduced in last May. But, and I'll say that something that actually was really rewarding to me, and you mentioned it, not really a day-to-day thing, but I made the decision right before we introduced it that I was like, look, it's a big set of changes, and I understand people getting nervous about things happening in their neighborhood. So I made the conscious effort, I am going to barnstorm every neighborhood association in my district to talk about why I support this, answer concerns, questions, get feedback from folks. I did that. Everyone in the district. I did it to a couple neighborhood associations, other people's district if they asked for it. I also, I told my staff, anytime someone calls about this bill, I'm going to call them back myself. Anytime someone emails about this bill, I'm going to email them back. So it was something that I want people to know. I want them to hear from me and I want to hear from them. And I think that because I was so thorough in that process, the 11th district has been a lot more supportive of the package, except for one neighborhood on the northern end of the district, but north of downtown, than the city as a whole. It was cool. It was like, hey, like I believe in this thing. I think this is really important for the city. I recognize that there's like political risk involved in this, but I think, and I recognize it's confusing. The zoning code is just, there's a lot of different things going on. And it's really weird and it's not intuitive. And so being able to take the risk for something you believe in and get out in front of people and explain why this matters, that was really rewarding actually last year. That was really cool.
And can you talk about some of the notable elements of the housing package and some changes people will be seeing?
Yeah, for sure. So the 4 main bills, 3 have passed, 1 has not passed. So I'll go, I guess, from maybe least to most provocative by South Baltimore standards. So the first one says basically every row home in the city was effectively not legal under the zoning code that we lived in for like 80 years. There were restrictions on how much of the lot could be covered by a building in a way that like most row home properties are bigger than that, right? Because they were built before that zoning code was put in. And so I had 4 or 5 times last year where someone would say, hey, we just had another baby. We're trying to add another room, whatever. Always we're trying to add another room onto the back. And the zoning appeals board is saying we can't do it. Please help. And it was like, that does suck. The zoning code is bad in that way, but it's straightforward. There's nothing I or anyone can do except for change the code. So we did change the code. So that was basically allowing people to build a little bit more on their own property. Yeah, that was that bill. Bulk and yard is the term in our city code for it. The next one, also really not very controversial. Before that last year, for the 180 years before that or whatever, if you wanted to build above 3 stories, you had to have 2 stairwells and they had to connect by a hallway in the city of Baltimore. That's common in most of the US and in Canada, that it's either 2 or 3 stories. Above that, you have to have the second stairwell and the connecting hallway. But in like Europe, in Japan, and I think most of the world, that requirement starts in at 5 or 6 stories. So this legislation said that, hey, if you want to build up to 6 stories, as long as you only have 4 units per floor and you meet all these fire protection standards, you're able to build up. Now, in residential areas, because we have height restrictions, it's really hard to get that high anyway. If you're in a commercial area or in downtown or whatever, hopefully we'll see a lot more of these kind of medium density, like 10, 15 unit places on like vacant lots or things that we haven't been able to build on for a long time. That was a good bill and did not have a lot of pushback. So the next bill, mine, I was the lead sponsor on, said we are not going to require parking minimums for any new buildings or anything in the city, which immediately for anyone who lives on Peninsula, like, it's hard to park here. What do you do it? This is not good. Or at least I feel nervous about this. Couple things that really made people feel a lot better about that. A, between 1 and 3 units, you already had an exemption. And then for 20 units or more, you already had an exemption. And for commercial 1, so like the Federal Hill Main Street area, a lot of the corner bars and restaurants like on Fort Avenue, stuff like that, like they already had these exemptions in. So you were really looking at the places that weren't already exempt were like 4 to 19 units of residential, or some of the kind of larger commercial zones, like maybe some of the buildings on Key Highway. And we could also point to, this is something a lot of cities from Buffalo to Birmingham have done already over the last decade. And typically 70 to 80% of the parking they would have built anyway. You're just giving the flexibility because you're saying, hey, if we think housing is a real problem, we need to make it easier to build housing. Maybe we shouldn't be requiring that you add on a parking space for every single unit, that type of thing. So that was certainly a hard sell on the outset. But then once I actually went and explained it to folks, the significant majority of folks were like, oh, okay, now I understand how this works and where you're going for here. So the last bill, the most contentious, the one that is still being considered right now, it's the Housing Options and Opportunities Act. It's the mayor's bill specifically. And what it says is if your lot is big enough and the building is big enough, you can fit up to 4 units on any residential property in the city. Right now, so on the peninsula, we don't have this restriction in place. It is a little bit more red tape to go through. Like it might take a couple more months, but you can say if you've got a vacant lot, you could build 3 units on, or if you have, say, a 3,000 square foot home or whatever, that would be the minimum size for 4 units. But so it'd make it easier to do conversions. And so that's something that you get a lot of concern. On one hand, you get a concern about, hey, what about home ownership? Because we know that a lot of these new units they're usually apartments, right? They're not condos in Baltimore, at least. And so this is for renters, not renting, not for home ownership. And I'd say, the majority of the city is renters, and we've had a huge increase in the rent and the cost of rent in the city. So having more flexibility there is an important thing. 2, I've only had 2 of these requests all last year. One was for a long-term vacant property in Federal Hill. One was for a blighted, collapsing vacant property in Upton to kind of level set, in our area and across the city. We haven't seen a ton of conversions. It's 10 per year citywide, and it's restricted to the row home neighborhoods. Right? Because back in the 20s, the city government at the time said, hey, we want to keep Black families out of these white kind of new suburban neighborhoods. So what are the tools we have? Can we use to restrict that explicitly? This is what the effort was. And the solution was, hey, if we say only 1 unit per residential parcel, it's going to be too expensive, not just for us Black families, but for immigrants. And it's going to restrict a lot of people from moving to these areas. 1, that's morally wrong. But 2, we also know today, and this is something I campaign on, feel really strongly about, that so many of Baltimore's biggest problems, the root of the problem is we very strongly, not just racially, but socioeconomically segregated the city. And we really haven't done anything meaningful to actually help resolve that. I mean, the proof's in the pudding, right? And so when you look at crime, if you look at the quality of the schools, if you look at how the tax burden lines up and everything, is actually a really terrible idea to basically require all the low-income people in a city to be in the same area. And that's what our zoning code intentionally did. And so this is an important thing that gets tackled. All that said, once again, I fully recognize that it is a big change, and it's probably the biggest proposed change of the bills. And so that's why there's a lot of concern. And the details are going to be adjusted so we can figure out something that works for a majority of the council. But that's basically where that's at.
And we specifically had a question that came into us about removing the parking requirements, especially how that, in this person's view, they said most people in South Baltimore are probably against removing parking requirements. So can you talk a little bit more about, I guess, any feedback you've had on that and how maybe some scenarios, how that could play out in South Baltimore?
So 1, I'll say that if you don't understand why we were pushing for the change, and you don't understand the likely impact, and you don't understand the change itself and what the actual change was versus what was already allowed, I can totally understand why it's not just scary sounding, but weird. Hey, I have to look for parking. I don't like that. I don't like looking for parking. Nobody does. I fully get it. But I'll say, I think I explained this to 8 different neighborhood associations on the peninsula. And really not a single time after I explained it did I get the sense that people felt really strongly against it. I'm happy to talk to anyone about this. But the point is, if you want to make it easier for people to have the housing that they need and lower the cost of housing, you have to get rid of adding all these additional burdens. Additional required off-street parking is a huge cost driver, and we shouldn't pretend like it's not, right? Almost half the renters in the city don't have a car. Over half the owners in the city have 1 car or no car. So we're not banning parking. We're saying build it if you want to. A lot of the new row homes that are going up in the city are going up with 2-car garages. That's fine. You can still do that if you want to do 0. That was if you want to not build any parking. That was actually already also allowed. Going back to my point about there was a lot of exemptions already in place. So happy to talk to anyone about any aspects of this package. I've literally spoken to over 400 Baltimore city residents directly, one-on-one, on top of 18 or 19 neighborhood associations.
Gotcha. Thank you for addressing that. And I know, too, you mentioned about the dual stairwells and the units above the buildings that go above 4 stories or more.
Six
It's
or
really,
less for 4 units per
6
floor.
stories or less is really what we've seen a lot in this city. We've seen a lot of townhome development. We've seen a lot of big apartment buildings built. Really, there's only been a few developers in the city that have done those medium buildings, and one of them just almost foreclosed, done everything they had. So that didn't end well. But really, like I said, you haven't seen a lot of those medium developers. So do you believe a zoning package like that, where instead of just seeing all row homes versus 200 unit buildings, we'll start to see more of those 20, 30, 40, 15 unit buildings?
Yeah, so that specifically, you wouldn't be able to do more than 24 units. 24 units would be the max under that single stairwell bill. But yeah, and I'll say that our zoning code and our building code largely prohibited that through all the requirements they put in place. It's not random that we don't see the type of a lot of 12 unit garden apartments that you see in like a pretty common in Chicago, or like actually up near Reservoir Hill. And they have some of those, right? And they're gorgeous and nice, and add another variety of the housing options. But they've largely been made illegal, or at least effectively impossible in the city before this. So I do think that we'll see more of it. It's not like every block is going to have one. And like I said, we don't change height requirements. We didn't change height requirements. So in a residential zone, you still aren't going to build any higher than you were before.
And your district encompasses downtown. And obviously, there's been a lot of changes in the world in recent years where a lot more remote work. We've seen state government offices are moving towards downtown. We've seen competing downtown districts in Baltimore, whether you're talking about Harbor East and Harbor Point and stuff in Locust Point and now Baltimore Peninsula. What would you say the current state of downtown is right now?
Bad. I mean, there are some bright spots, but we shouldn't beat around the bush. The stereotype that everybody has from post-pandemic, the drop in office demands across office markets and what that's done to downtowns, and how a lot of restaurants had to close because they lost their lunch traffic and all that. Like, that happened here at least as bad as it happened in most places. And so we've lost like $20 million less a year in revenue just from the properties that have reassessed, because the way that like commercial leases work, like that's going to continue to get worse. And so that's a real challenge. We have lost some key corporate partners from downtown, in my district, to Harbor East and Harbor Point. We're starting to lose them to Baltimore Peninsula, also in the 11th district. So it's bad, and we really need like large scale solutions. There's challenges on the street level in downtown, whether it's graffiti. Downtown has a really particularly intense homeless challenge. There is 6 lanes of traffic across like multiple streets that make public space suck. There's not a lot of green space in downtown. There's a lot of challenges in downtown. And so we need bold, comprehensive solutions. I think Downtown Rise, the mayor's sort of like, initial comprehensive plan, is a good framework first step, but there's some other stuff that is going to have to happen. I like saying downtown is the second most important neighborhood for every resident of the city. And if you don't feel that way, it's a testament to how bad of a situation our downtown is in. And so it's always going to have the most businesses in the city. It's always going to be the transit. For our transit system to be good, we need a healthy downtown. And those things are extremely symbiotic. The art scene, immigrant restaurants, like walkability as a whole, like nightlife, all these other things, right? Like downtown is a key player for all of that. And so we need some really bold solution or two to step up. There's a couple things that I've been hearing and have been in talks with folks about. None of that is like far enough along to be talking about on the podcast yet. Hopefully, if I come back in 27, we can dive more into that. One thing that I am really proud of this, and I think it's a meaningful help here, the area around Lexington Market. If you think Howard Street, Utah Street, and those cross streets in that area, which definitely has one of the largest concentration of vacates in downtown, I've been able to lead in putting together a team of folks from code enforcement, from DHCD's legal team, from sort of economic development, downtown partnership, et cetera. We've come together and we've started having a recurring meeting to like really get ahead of the vacancy challenge specifically in that area. And we had a couple of those meetings, and I think we're really starting to move in the right direction there. And so that's something that as a legislator, you're kind of limited in the sort of amount of things you can influence hands-on. I'm not the mini mayor for the 11th district, right? I'm a legislator, but that is something that I'm really proud of. And I think we have the right team together to really help tackle that.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in that area. One of my favorite stores on earth is Trinacria, and I've been going there all of my adult life. And so I'm there as much as I am any other neighborhood outside of South Baltimore. It really has an interesting dichotomy right now because you have the new Metro West complex, which is getting redeveloped. So that should be a big boost for the area, if at the minimum, taking a very large vacant graffitied up property and making that look better. Then you have the School of Social Work, which is a block or two south of there, which is going up. And then you got the new Lexington Market. And then I guess there's the opportunity to take the former Lexington Market buildings and put some investment into those. So it really is interesting where
everything's at.
I mean, there's blocks of it where are as trash strewn as anywhere you'll see in a downtown, but it certainly feels like there's some really important pieces going in. And if you could sew it all together and make it a healthy Upper West Side of the downtown, you could really have something there.
And I like that verb, Kevin. So I think the city over the last couple decade or whatever, right, has done a solid enough job on the assets themselves. Like new Lexington Market, when you're in Lexington Market, it's actually awesome. Lexington Market's great. Yeah. The challenge is what's outside, what's the connective tissue. And so I think that's something that it should be natural to walk from an O's game to Lexington Market. I don't think that a lot of people do that.
You look at crime, there's been 200 less murders in Baltimore over the last few years. Huge drop since the peak of 2019. Last year finished with 133 homicides. So a huge drop. And that's not only huge for less people losing their life, but obviously that number of these 300 plus homicides was such an easy target to always make fun of Baltimore and talk about how bad Baltimore is. So obviously a very huge step in the right directions when it comes to homicides. And obviously the non-fatal shootings come with that. But also homicides aren't the whole picture. And I know there's a lot of people in certain areas, especially like Federal Hill, that are uneasy a lot these days with some increased violence and property crime. So talk to me about your thoughts on the current state of crime and any things that can be done to make some people that still aren't feeling safe in their own homes or their own blocks and potentially make them feel better in the future.
Yeah. I'll say you talked homicides, documented that homicides are at almost a third of what they were averaging between 2015 and 2022. Right. That's kind of surreal. And it's a way bigger drop. It's like the biggest drop in the country by far. This is a positive national trend. It's steepest here. That was the lowest number of homicides since 1963. My mother wasn't born yet. So it's incredible. Violent crime and property crime citywide move in the right direction. Violent crime and property crime on the peninsula move in the right direction. We look at even in Federal Hill, right? If you look at the Federal Hill area from 2023 to 2025, 40% drop in violent crime. Part of that whole car theft thing, explosion, all that, right? The situation, the challenges we were having with youth after the pandemic and with challenges holding young people accountable and commit crimes, all that, like really moving in the right direction on a lot of these things. And it's explicit in the data. And if anyone wants to learn more about it, it's the MONSE's dashboard. It's straight out of BPD data. I'm happy to discuss it. Happy to go into depth with anyone on it. Side note, moving in the right direction does not mean good. Does not mean good. I'm not implying that. No one should say that I'm implying that. You heard it here first. We still have plenty of work to do. We should be striving to be safer than the normal city, right? As opposed to the situation we're in and have been in for the last 50 years. That said, the bad sort of asterisks on the public safety situation across the peninsula, maybe starting with the least serious version of that. We've seen uptake in like package theft and some like larceny across the Southern District is the only thing that's up substantially year over year from 24 was up like 20%. Almost everything is down. A couple other kind of less severe things are up slightly. That's the one that's up by a lot, but that's a Southern District wide thing. I think that the challenge with going back to the housing crisis, going back to the city's growing homeless population, which is what you get when you can't afford rent, like those types of things, when you overlap that with the substance abuse crisis, that's something that we need to tackle. And certainly over the holidays, that kind of month before it peaks, but it's been an increasing challenge that we need to address. I know the sheriff has some things he's been working on there. There's a couple of nonprofits that are working on stuff, really trying to figure out what I and my office can do to be helpful there. Next up, you have the other low end of the severity on the nuisance side is dirt biking, particularly in Key Highway in the Federal Park area. It's been a real nuisance crime challenge in the city for a while. Obviously, BPD was getting a good handle on it, and I think they confiscated 200 dirt bikes in 2023. They confiscated like a third of that this past year. So that wasn't good. That was a bad trend. And that dominated my conversations with everyone who lived in that, from the seniors who live at the Light Street Christchurch apartments over to the condos on the waterfront, people who live near Federal Park. Dirt bikes are like 16 times louder than the legal noise threshold in the city of Baltimore. So that's a real problem. And there's also other challenges. That's something else that really working to get a better solution for when the weather warms up. And then lastly is the crime environment late night in the bar district right around Cross Street Market. So if you draw a 1 block circle around Cross Street Market, you get 5 homicides in the last 27 months. It's absurd. And there were 4 shootings in 2025 within a block of the market. There was a very near miss on, I think, New Year's night, maybe the morning of like New Year's Eve, New Year's morning, like right outside. That's a problem. I think that I was just talking on C4 and Brian Newman about this on WBL this morning. I think there are some things that needs to change how they address entertainment district public order. They need to do that, treat that differently from how they treat, say, an area around Lexington Market type of place, right? Where like you can't rely on relationship building in the area on Cross Street Market. It's a bunch of people coming in, drinking, they go home, right? Like you're never going to know those people. You have to create a good sense of public order there. There's also a couple of establishments there that I think have not been good partners, and that's being addressed. There's a lot that needs to get done there. And so that is how I would assess the public safety environment on the peninsula. I'll just recap that by saying that if you look at where crime is at across the peninsula, 2025 versus 2022, 2023, it's substantial drops in every category. And so that is, once again, moving in the right direction is different from being good, but it's still a real cause for optimism.
Sure. Just looking back at some old articles we did, I know there was a 4-year stretch between 2009 and 2013 where there wasn't any homicides in the greater Federal Hill area. So I know just seeing this violent crime make its way to Federal Hill is not something that people of Federal Hill have ever been used to and certainly don't want to become used to. And hopefully that's something that'll decrease, because obviously if you're out at a night at the bars or just walking around and you encounter something like that's probably something you're never going to forget. And obviously, unfortunately, something that so many people in the city have had to witness over the years, but it's certainly something that nobody wants to get used to in their own neighborhood. And hopefully it's something that will start to trend in the right direction again. Zach, I know you're involved in sports yourself, former football player. You're involved with the Digital Harbor football team on their coaching staff. And I know one of the issues you've been passionate about is local rec sports and the growth of middle school sports around here. So talk about what you've been working on there and what your goals are.
Maybe I should have led with this. Maybe we put this on the front end of the podcast. No. And I think you've been on some of those calls, Kevin, but we've started doing a South Baltimore Sports Coalition, where it's like the middle schools, Digital Harbor High School, South Baltimore Little League, South Baltimore Youth Soccer, the Flag Football League, the Youth Basketball League, kind of getting everyone together in one space every couple months, say like, hey, what are people working on? What are some challenges folks are having? How can we work together to make this just a better environment for recreational sports as a whole, but certainly for kids, because we all know it's important for the kids, right? To have something to be excited about, to have something to be able to compete, to be able to work hard and something to be a member of a team. It's important for parents to get to interact with and build those relationships with your kids, friends, parents. And it's important for neighborhoods to feel like, to be able to see this and see what's going on. It's a win. And so it's something that, as someone who played a lot of sports in my life, especially football, and still coach football at Digital today, it's something that is close to my heart and something that I understand intuitively. So I've been proud to be able to put together that coalition. And I also introduced a resolution. We had a hearing over middle school sports and the role that city schools is playing to expand middle school sports offering. We had that in November. It was really interesting. That's definitely something that's moving in the right direction. Coming from Friday Night Lights country, we had a couple of middle school sports, but I think in Maryland, a lot of times sports at that age are outsourced to club sports and little leagues and all that. And that is, I think it causes real problems, especially for kids who come from families of lower means. They don't get those opportunities for high school. And so I think it's just general better for all kids to be able to have these opportunities on the middle school level. And that is something that you could definitely say, yeah, we are really moving in the right direction on. The growth in sports being offered and in the number of kids participating in it is definitely moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think what we learned through a lot of those meetings is a lot of times it's, if you can get everybody on the same page, you can figure out the way to get things figured out. Where obviously if people have mutual interests in certain fields, whether you're talking the high school level, the elementary level, the middle school level, the rec league level, the club team level, I think everyone has similar interests in good facilities and working together and how one league can make another more successful. And I know working on an issue with the Little League is one of the biggest issues the Little League had was finding more field space. Yep. And one of the ways we're getting towards solving that is getting everybody together. We figured out that one of the fields that we want to start using wasn't owned by who we thought it was owned by. So bringing everybody together was a way to figure that out and work towards resolving that.
Knock on wood, right? Because I haven't been fixed yet, but it is a good example of it.
So Baltimore Peninsula, at least east of Hanover Street, is in your District 11. Recent news is that part of that development has been developed, Chapter 1B, but what we did learn is the remaining undeveloped land parcels have now been taken over by the bank OZK, and it looks like the bank will look to find a different owner or a different partner to sell that land and potentially finish that development. So any thoughts from your position on Baltimore Peninsula and what you'd like to see happen there?
Yeah. The part of Baltimore Peninsula that's built out already is actually doing pretty solid. The residential is leased out. Some of the ground level retail is doing well already. And I think as it gets a little more established, some of the rest of it will do well. But for that huge vacant space between what's been built out and Hanover Street, that big empty lot at this point, what I would say is look just south of there at Lock Landing and look at how all those row homes are doing. Baltimore is a row home city. We've got row homes right across the street selling for way more than people thought they would. So I don't want us to be 5 years from now and it looks like it does now, right? So I think there's a real opportunity. I know this option has been explored some. I've certainly been encouraging it whenever people ask me about it. But look, just build row home neighborhoods, and you're going to have, it's a good opportunity for families to stay in the city, you have a stable neighborhood, people paying property taxes and income taxes, and helping move past the like, hey, this space is stalled out and everything. You made a point before the broadcast of we don't need more like office space. We don't need more mini downtowns, but certainly having good housing, like the demand is there for that unquestionably. So that's what I would say. We'll see what the next step end up being for that area.
Sure. And you look at townhome development in the recent years, and you're talking about families staying, is what we've seen a trend lately, which obviously has shown its results, is you're starting to see townhomes that are 2,600 square feet or bigger, which allows these homes to have 4 or 5 bedrooms, or to have that 4 bedrooms plus an office. We talked about the increase in working from home. So really that trend where you saw it at Banner Row next to Francis Scott Key, and now you're seeing it at Lock Landing, and probably potentially do more, where I've had as many friends leave because they just can't find the space they need in a house, versus the other issues like crime and property taxes and schools and other things, where people need a house that has enough space to live in. So clearly maybe Baltimore Peninsula could become a haven where people are moving, where that you can find a little bit more space and have 3 kids and have 2 parents that work from home and those things. So it's been encouraging to see these larger townhomes starting to get big, and even Lock Landing's building some townhomes that are over 3,000 square feet. So to have more options, as great as CHAP was, it created a million new 2-bedroom row houses throughout the city, and clearly a two-bedroom row house only fits so many sizes of the family. So it's good to see a movement towards some larger homes now, which is clearly allowing certain families to stay for longer.
I am 100% about having every type of housing in the city. As household sizes get smaller, we would probably need more smaller number of bedroom units. My wife and I have 2 little ones, and God willing, may one day have a third. We need to have all the types of housing for people who want to stay in the city.
If people want to get a hold of you, you have a newsletter, right?
Yep, monthly newsletter. We can put the link to that, and then my email and phone and all that stuff.
Zac, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, guys.